In a small town, a heartbreaking tragedy unfolded when a young black girl drowned while police officers stood by, refusing to help. The officers' inaction left the community in shock and outrage. What followed was a fierce fight for justice, led by the girl's father, whose pain and determination would shake the very foundation of the system. As the community rallied behind him, questions about racism, corruption, and accountability began to surface. How could a police officer stand by while life was lost? And what would it take to make things right? The father's fight for justice became more than just a personal battle. It turned into a powerful movement that challenged the very idea of justice itself. But as the fight grew, it became clear that this wasn't going to be an easy battle. What happened next would change everything. Stay tuned to find out. The night of the drowning, the small town was rocked with disbelief. Witnesses reported that as the girl struggled in the water, desperate for help, the police officer who was nearby did nothing. People shouted, pleading for action, but the officer remained unmoved, his cold indifference echoing in the silence of that fateful evening. The girl's father, already overwhelmed with grief, couldn't understand how someone sworn to protect could turn a blind eye to such a tragedy. In the days that followed, the community was split, some outraged, others too afraid to speak up. But her father refused to stay silent. He began questioning everything he had ever trusted about the justice system, digging deep into the officer's past, uncovering a troubling history of complaints and accusations. Each revelation fueled his fire, but it also brought him face to face with dark forces determined to protect their own. The deeper he went, the more dangerous it became. As the days passed, the father's fight for justice turned into something far more complex than he had ever imagined. His search for answers led him to uncover a web of corruption within the local police department, officers covering for each other, records mysteriously erased, and complaints buried. Every lead he chased seemed to open up more questions. Why had no one intervened to save his daughter? And who was protecting the officer who stood by, watching it all happen? Meanwhile, the police officer's colleagues remained eerily silent, as if bound by an unspoken loyalty. The father's frustration grew, as did his anger, but so did his resolve. He started reaching out to lawyers, local activists, anyone who might help expose the truth. However, each person he turned to had their own fears and reservations. They feared retaliation, the same forces the father was up against, forces that didn't hesitate to silence anyone who threatened their power. The small town, once peaceful, had now become a battlefield, and every step forward felt like stepping into deeper danger. As the father's campaign grew louder, so did the threats. His home was broken into, documents were stolen, and anonymous phone calls warned him to back off. But the deeper he dug, the more resistance he faced, almost as if the entire town was part of a secret pact to protect one man. He started receiving whispers about the officer's connections, how powerful people in the community might have been involved in covering up past mistakes. Yet, every time he thought he was getting closer to the truth, a new obstacle emerged, pushing him further into a corner. The media caught wind of the story, and soon the pressure intensified. Some supported the father's crusade, but others tried to discredit him, painting him as a man driven by grief and vengeance. It wasn't long before the officer's past came under scrutiny, but the more the father uncovered, the more he realized this case wasn't just about one officer. It was about a broken system that protected those who should have been held accountable. In the midst of it all, the father's own sense of justice began to blur. The lines between right and wrong, what was legal and what was moral, started to fade as he grappled with the growing weight of his mission. Every step forward felt like a step closer to a point of no return. He knew the stakes were higher than ever, but with so much on the line, could he survive the truth he was about to expose? Just when it seemed like the father was on the brink of breaking through, a shocking revelation sent everything spiraling. Late one night, as he was reviewing the police officer's record, he stumbled upon a hidden file, one that had been deliberately overlooked in the public investigation. It wasn't about the officer at all, but rather the girl, his daughter. In it, he found an unsettling detail. She had been involved in a minor altercation with a local figure just days before her death. This person, it seemed, had connections to the police officer, and the investigation had been quietly tampered with long before the drowning ever happened. The discovery hit him like a gut punch. It was more than just a simple case of negligence or racial bias. It was personal. His daughter's life may have been taken because she knew too much or had become a threat to those in power. The more the father thought about it, the clearer it became. This was a setup. As he connected the dots, he realized the police officer was not the only one who needed to be held accountable. The deeper the father went into this rabbit hole, the more dangerous the waters became. Now, not only was he fighting for justice for his daughter, but for his own survival. Someone had been orchestrating a cover-up for far too long, and the true extent of the conspiracy was still out of reach. With time running out, the father knew that if he didn't act fast, the forces working against him would stop at nothing to bury the truth, permanently. The father knew he couldn't wait any longer. With the final pieces of the puzzle in place, he made the daring decision to go public. He contacted the media and demanded a meeting with the district attorney, determined to reveal everything. Armed with the uncovered files, the records, and the damning connections, he prepared for the fight of his life. But as he walked into the room, expecting to face resistance, something unexpected happened. The district attorney was already aware of everything. In a shocking twist, the father learned that the DA had been secretly investigating the very people he was up against. His daughter's death wasn't an isolated incident. It had been part of a pattern of corruption and abuse spanning years. The DA had been gathering evidence for months, waiting for the right moment to strike. They'd even known about the officer's ties to the town's most powerful figures. It turned out the fight for justice wasn't just the father's, it was a fight for the town's future. Just as the father thought the tide had turned, a final twist emerged. The police officer who had stood by and let his daughter drown wasn't the only one complicit in her death. The shocking truth was revealed. The officer had been set up by someone even more powerful, someone who had orchestrated the entire tragedy to protect their own interests. But who? The answer was a bitter pill to swallow. It was someone close to home, someone the father had trusted all along. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community. The fight for justice had gone far deeper than he could have imagined. With the truth now exposed, the officer was arrested, but the father realized that even in victory, the battle wasn't over. The system had been shaken, but it would take more than one man's fight to truly change it. Still, for the first time, he felt the weight of his daughter's legacy in his hands, knowing that her death would not be in vain. In the weeks that followed, the town began to heal. The officer, along with others complicit in the cover-up, faced charges, and the community slowly began to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. The father, though, couldn't quite shake the feeling that justice was still an ongoing journey. He had won the battle for his daughter, but the larger war against systemic corruption had just begun. Still, he found comfort in knowing that his daughter's memory had sparked a movement, one that brought people together to demand change. As the story made headlines nationwide, the father became a symbol of resilience, showing others that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one voice could start a revolution. The town may have been forever marked by tragedy, but it had also been forever changed. And while the fight wasn't over, the father knew that through his courage, something real and lasting had begun.